Okay, good morning everybody. We are running a bit short in time, so if possible I would like to start and trying to run a 20 minutes scheme and we will have the questions afterwards. So although again it will save some time. So we have a nice lineup of speakers, although I haven't seen the last speaker yet. But we start with Nicholas Holt. Well, his biography is impressive, starting with a Bachelor of Architecture, which is always a good starting point. He is expert in regional conditions, which is my personal interest. And since he starts with Nicholas Holt and he ends with Nicholas Church, I suppose he is managing well and managing in time. Please, the floor is to Nicholas Holt.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay? I suspect most of the gang is out there getting coffee still, which is great. My talk today, I think very appropriately fits into the high-performance buildings category here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Tower 1, a project very near and dear to our hearts at SOM New York, and a project that is really all about high-performance design and all of its characteristics, not just sustainability, but commercial ideas, security ideas, safety ideas, etc. So we'll spend a little bit of time going through a number of those facets. In 20 minutes, it's a very short amount of time, so I will gloss over a lot and make myself available at the end of the session for any questions that you all have. The first thing I just want to mention is this is our office right over here. So it is literally in our backyard. We're about 300 or 400 meters away from the site as the crow flies. So it's sort of part of our daily consciousness to work on this job. We were there 10 years ago with the events of September 11th unfolded, something that, so we really have a vested interest in how this project came together. It's also the story of two projects. The first is 7 World Trade Center, which is this project right here. And I'll go into that a little bit because it's a very unusual situation that we have on this job with Tower 1. We were able to kind of use a test bed or an audition, if you will, in terms of the project work. So many of the things that we ultimately incorporated in the super tall Tower 1 were initially incorporated in 7 World Trade Center and experimented with. And there's a number of different reasons for that. After the events of September 11th, this is what the site looked like. The Tower 1 site is here, or the original Trade Center site is here, and this is where 7 World Trade sat. It was part of the plinth, the urban sort of design of that area, and it formed kind of a barrier east and west and north and south. But what was interesting about it is that when the sort of site unfolded during the sort of aftermath of September 11th, we were able to kind of keep 7 World Trade out of the main conversation. There's a couple of reasons for that that I'll go into in a second. But what that meant is that we could move very, very quickly with none of the political intrigue that was happening on the main site down here that everybody is all too familiar with. So the first thing we did with 7 World Trade, and we started working on 7 World Trade literally 4 weeks after September 11th. We started construction in May of 2002. But the first thing we did before any of the master plans had been devised is have an idea about reconnecting the grid of the city, reconnecting east and west and north and south. And so the whole design of 7 World Trade really became a story about sort of reestablishing the urban grid and setting a very high bar in terms of sort of social cultural responsibility in the redevelopment. So this is the project as it stands today, and this is the floor plan, and this is, we put this in because this is really what drove the job right here. These 5 boxes that you see are the Con Edison substation, the power substation that drove all of South Manhattan. So part of the reason we got started so quickly on this job is because this had to get built as fast as humanly possible. So what we did is we have a future group here, the existing group here, and then we squeezed as many elevators in the middle as we could and went up as high as we could and serviced the floors efficiently. And that really is the driving piece behind, from a technical point of view for Seven World Trade. And then there's a whole story here about safety and security and creating buffer zones, urban space, a doorway into the main site, which is down here, and these kinds of things that sort of set precedent for Tower 1. This is the original Seven World Trade. It was such an attractive building that we couldn't find any photographs of it. And you can see exactly what it did. This is looking south down Greenwich Street, right into the Trade Center site. It was literally a wall that stopped the city. And this is where we ended up. So we basically created the gateway that ultimately helped inform the rest of the master plan that was ultimately developed by Daniel Liebskin. So what did Seven World Trade really give us? At the time, the conversation in the industry was really about whether or not people would actually ever go back into a high-rise. If you remember, there were many, many articles being published at the time about maybe this is the end of the high-rise. Safety is just too big a concern. It's never going to work. And so, interestingly, Larry Silverstein and the team had, at the time, sort of a, and I should mention also, it was all right at the time of the dot-com bust, so we were in a little bit of a mini recession as well. So there were lots of things saying maybe not, right? But Larry Silverstein, with his vision and looking at what was going to ultimately be developed in the rest of the site, thought about setting a prime example of how we can sort of raise the bar a little bit in the city. So we looked at sustainability, we looked at safety and security, and other things. And on the safety side, we were dealing with the codes and changes that were coming out of the NIST reports that were happening at that time following the Trade Center tragedy. A couple of the things that we did do, this is a very, very simple extruded efficient floor plate. We turned the core inside out. We brought all of the circulation into the underside of the core. This does a couple of things. One, all of the pieces that are servicing the building are protected within a concrete shear wall. And then we can plan right up to the inside face of the shear wall. So there's a certain amount of efficiency there, but there's also a safety component there that was driven home. The section is also quite interesting. The Con Ed substation occupies the lower 80 feet. The first office floor is 100 feet above grade. So here we have an incredibly dense urban environment, but we were able to get 100 feet of standoff distance by virtue of being 100 feet above grade with the first primary occupied floors. It also set all of the air intakes higher. Many of the things that people are concerned about in terms of chem bio are heavier than air, so getting them to entrain into the building when the intakes are high up in the building is very difficult to do. And then, let's see if it's going to work for us. We also looked at dual interconnected standpipes, basically two independent standpipes in the building, each serving every other floor. We all know that the way to deal with safety in high-rises primarily is get water to the fire and take care of it that way. The more the fire burns, the worse off you are. And there's a big story there, and you watch that unfold on the events of September 11th. But here, we created another level of redundancy. And then here is the lobby, and you talk about security, a cable net wall system here that has very high blast performance criteria for a glass wall. And then an art piece done by Jenny Holtzer, which in fact actually doubled as, think of it as a crumple zone that helped buffer the blast within the lobby and protect the people who were waiting for elevators behind it. So the idea of kind of taking really high-level security issues and safety issues and then turning them into architectural opportunities was a big story at Seven World Trade. Sustainability as well, daylighting views. At the time, the most sustainable project in town was a project called 4 Times Square, which today would not even qualify for LEED certification, but at the time sort of set a new standard in New York for what was commercially viable. Seven World Trade elevated that standard by being part of the LEED Core and Shell pilot program, and then winning a gold award there, and also partnering up with a number of governmental agencies. But once we did that, the city has now moved to a point where any new major skyscraper is really pursuing LEED Gold as a minimum in the office world, not necessarily residential world, but in the office world. And even now, with the advent of Bryant Park project, One Bryant Park, we're now looking at platinum projects. So this was literally along a progression that is driving the market ever higher in terms of sustainability criteria. So that all brings us around to One World Trade. I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but that's the bar that we set for ourselves. And the idea was to bring One World Trade up to the next level as well. The design itself, the location up here in the corner was set by Daniel Liebeskind's master plan, and it really becomes a nice little counterpoint to the voids below for where the tower footprints were, and then sort of creating a marker in the northwest corner of the site. And then that also worked through sectionally, where the voids were then taken with a counterpoint with the building as it rose. So that's kind of how we rolled it into the master plan and conceived of it. It's a very, very simple form. You're simply chamfering the corners of a square, which tapers the overall building, following the core as it drops off, keeping an incredibly efficient floor plate. A couple of key numbers: 1776, a number driven by the master plan as a marker, a key date in U.S. history. It's a little bit abstract, but it was a key component of the master plan, so we incorporated that with the spire. And then I think far more poignant is the 1362 and the 1368. This is the top of the parapet and the bottom of the parapet marked on the new Tower 1, and those are the heights of the two towers that fell on September 11th. Again, just kind of a sense of the form. The spire itself was initially intended to be a broadcast tower. The vendor that was going to use it for that purpose has since backed out, so now it is still built and it could receive broadcast capabilities later, but is not currently going to do so. The building borrows an awful lot from Seven World Trade. The base is mechanical floors. This, as many of you may know, is the second design we did. The first design was scuttled, quite frankly, by new requirements for security that were brought to us by the New York City Police Department about 3 or 4 years into the process. So this one required us to kind of rethink the base, and it turned it into a very heavy concrete mass. The first office floor is about 200 feet above grade. I mean, it's a skyscraper above grade before you get the first office floor. And then we have mechanical systems up here in the top. It is a pure office building. This is not mixed use, which is rather unusual these days in the world of super talls. Structure we'll breeze through very, very quickly. Let's see. It's made up of a series, sort of 3 primary components: the antenna and cable structure, which was done by Schleich Bergman, the primary tower and the base. So this is basically steel framing with a concrete core, and then the base itself was primarily concrete with a little bit of steel infill. That was all designed by Cantor Scenic and Ahmad Rahimian over there. The base of the building, very complex. We had trains running through here, digging out with spoons 3 hours a night between the train schedules. It took a very long time to get the foundations up and out of the ground, but it was a very complex sort of knuckle of things in this area. The floor slabs are actually supporting the slurry walls that go around the site. Again, concrete core, I'll talk about that in a second, a little bit unusual in New York City, very commonplace everywhere else in the world. Some diaphragms to help resist wind loads. A little bit of sense of the scale of the steel and the sizes of it. Sort of the challenges of the form of the building created some thrusting forces here that had to be resisted and tied back down into the floor framing package. And then a good sense of sort of the shear wall makeup, starting at 1.2 meters at the base, ending up at 0.6 meters at the top. Interesting anecdote here. The 0.6 meters up here is about twice as much as we actually needed from a structural design point of view. But Larry Silverstein, the developer, in sort of thinking about the marketplace and how people perceive buildings, had made a promise to his leasers or lessees that he would always have 2 feet of concrete around the stairs. So we actually ended up with a little bit of extra structure at the top of the building that was not really required to hold the building up, but was part of sort of a marketing and safety and security idea. Talking about how to thread this thing through the train station, every single facade of this building, northeast, south, and west, was different based on how the train tracks laid out below. created an enormous amount of complexity, but ultimately Ahmad and his team was able to solve the problems. And then we've clad it, of course, in a nice glass material to kind of conceal all of it. This is, for those of you that know concrete cores with steel framing, an incredibly unusual picture. Every other place in the world builds their concrete core first and the steel follows. In New York City, we have this thing called unions, and the steel workers refuse to work underneath the concrete workers, ostensibly for safety reasons. Of course, it's only a safety issue in New York. I suspect it has more financial implications. But as a result, we had to work with Tishman, and we pioneered this on the Seven World Trade Project. The concrete core is about here and being poured in this location. There's a periforming system that is actually moving up through the center of the building. So this is one of the very unique kind of conditions of Tower 1 in terms of its construction sequencing. Interestingly enough, we've gotten good enough at it that we're looking at about a week for each floor to go up. So we're right on pace with what the more normal kind of construction timeframes would be for a building like this. The lobby, you saw, well, I'll show you in a second, I think, some floor plans that show the lobby is really a solid concrete mass. There's no windows. These are actually lighting elements, which is part of the New York City Police Department's requirements. But the idea is to look at materiality and dichroic glass, stones, art programs, and things like that to make it a wonderful architectural experience in the absence of natural light. And then there is a sky lobby in terms of the elevatoring systems. Wow, terrible resolution. But, and this is the sky lobby here. So that helped us sort of have a fairly efficient floor plate. Floor to ceiling glass, and you can see how the typical floors lay out. The core actually sort of mirrors the shape of the building as it moves up. And again, borrowing from what we did at Seven World Trade, all of the primary circulation, all of the life safety elements are within these center corridors. So that gives us a layer of protection where people can gather, queue up, and move down the stairs as they egress the building. The curtain wall, at the time, this was the largest piece of production insulated glazing unit that you could buy. Viracon actually built a new line to run this glass. It's low iron, it's blast resistant, and of course lots of testing. And there's a laminated makeup on the outside that gives us some of the blast resistance and very good energy performance. I'll skip right through this, some nice little fun facts that happen. A lot of the things we did in terms of sustainability and MEP services we did here on Seven World Trade, we did on the Tower 1. And then this is a very interesting component. This is the Seven World Trade egress system and the Tower 1 egress system married up. But what we actually have figured out is a way to get both of the primary egress stairs to exit from any one point on the ground floor. So the egress stairs come down, are connected at one point and connected at one point, and then ultimately egress to different points on the floor below. Now this is kind of particularly interesting. It came directly out of the events of September 11th, where it was difficult to bring people out certain facades because of falling debris and other dangerous issues going on. So this gives the fire department a way to bring people out the north if the event has happened on the south. If there is no external event, people come down the stairs as if they would in any other building. But in this particular case, this gave us sort of direct access to the exterior. And you've all seen this image, something that was a big issue. Tower 1, everybody had to stop while the firemen were coming up, and it was slowing them down as well. So we've taken a really hard look, very, very common sense look, nothing new here, but a very, very common sense look at how a code required stair could be enhanced to make it flow much better, deal with human factors much better, and be more redundant in terms of lighting and other issues, and be more effective. And this is the core within a core. So we have a dedicated fireman stair, pressurized lobby served by an elevator, and then a smoke-proof lobby that serves enhanced elevators that can operate in the event of many different kinds of emergencies. This gives the firefighters yet another option for how to deal with it. They can either engage elevator-assisted egress or other ideas and make use of this. So flexibility in terms of dealing with an emergency event. The timeline. Seven World Trade, 2004, sort of set the tone for the site in many ways. And then you can see how the other components of the site are coming to fruition. Ultimately, we're looking at completion in 2014. Right now, we're looking at topping out steel this winter, probably January. And And Tower 4 here, I'll show you an image in a second, I'm sorry, here, is actually moving very quickly as well. Towers 2 and 3 are on hold, and this is Calatrava's train station. So this is where we are today, or as of a month ago. We're about 1,000 feet in the air. The project is moving very, very quickly at this point. And this is the Tower 4 that I talked about a second ago. So it's right about here right now, and then Tower 1 is right about here right now. So we're moving apace. It's been a really nice run so far. We're looking forward to the finish. Another little quick piece, the spire. We have a lighting element at the top. And this lighting element actually borrows from sort of the nautical history of the eastern coast of the US, where each city sent out a beacon in roughly Morse code, but sort of the nautical version of that, that said B if you were at Boston, N if you're in New York, P if you're in Philadelphia. So this is actually visible for 26 miles, and it's going to flash in N as sort of a marker for New York City as we go forward. Big team works on this. Great group of consultants. And these are construction shots that were taken here in the last 3 or 4 months of the site. You can see Tower 4 moving up here, the memorial moving here, and Tower 1 here. And these are images here, these nighttime shots are images that were taken on the eve of the 10th anniversary marking of the events of September 11th. I happened to be driving up from a family visit from New Jersey and just saw this marker here. It was an incredibly poignant moment to see the building lit up in red, white, and blue, and starting now to be tall enough to actually anchor the south part of Manhattan. For 10 years, it's felt as if the city was unbalanced. And when I moved to the city, there was the anchor of the World Trade Center and the Empire State Building in Midtown. And now that balance is finally returning to Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas Holt. We have to rush very hard, so if there are any questions, please keep them to the end. Our next speaker